Way back in 2005, two brothers set off on a road trip that would save the world and change television.
Ernie and Bert?
No. For 15 seasons and 327 episodes, Supernatural took audiences on a wild ride of family, fate, and faith with a rocking soundtrack and a seriously cool car.
But that was then, Bobo, and this is now. And yes, the show has quote-unquote ended, but we're not quite done with the journey.
No, we're not.
And that's why we're watching it all over again, or for Rob and me, for the first time,
That's right.
diving deep into every episode of Supernatural with the fine folks who made it. And we're taking you along for the ride.
Whether you like it or not. I'm Rob Benedict. I played Chuck Shirley, a.k.a. God.
Spoiler!
Yeah, it is a bit of a spoiler, but hey, spoilers are fair game here.
Fine. And I'm Richard Speight Jr., and I played the Trickster, also known as the Archangel Gabriel. And I did a little bit of Loki work in there.
Okay, you know what? We're running out of time.
Okay, well, we'll be talking about the entire series, so whatever we say, accept it. You've been warned.
So buckle up and settle in.
Because this, my friend, is Supernatural, then and now.
Hey, everybody, I'm Rob Benedict.
I'm Richard Speight, and we're back.
We are back with episode number 2, which you actually call episode number 1.
Right, because we started this podcast by talking about the pilot, which they don't ever actually number.
Right.
It's called the pilot.
That's right.
And so this is, even though the second episode of season 1, it's called episode 101.
That's right. And we continue our talk with Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki, and we dive a little bit deeper into what was going on behind the scenes during this point of shooting.
Well, we learned a little bit about, certainly we talked about Kim Manners, who was a well-respected director, producing director of the show, and didn't survive the run of the show. He passed away somewhere in there. Phenomenal director, apparently also a stern taskmaster.
That's
that
right.
Guy.
As was Bob Singer. And we'll talk about that as well. And the boys just kind of walk us through a little bit like creating the family, the Winchester family.
And that's sort of an on and off screen conversation, right? I mean, like what it was like to sort of be bonding with each other.
That's right.
And figuring out how to make this thing sing. And then the crew, because now they've got the crew that really becomes the backbone of the show for, in large part, 15 seasons, because a very high retention rate in the Supernatural crew.
And this episode was directed by David Nutter. We talk a little bit more about him, how he's the pilot king.
Yeah. So if you fly planes, David Nutter's your guy.
He's the pilot king. So we're in the second episode, and we're getting into the Monster of the Week. It's season 1. It's all about the Monster of the Week. In this episode, in the dangerous backwoods of Colorado, a monster lurks, hungry for human prey. Will Sam and Dean be able to protect another fractured family from this menace?
Following the coordinates that John left them in Jericho, which, by the way, when those coordinates show up, I have no idea what they are.
Nobody.
There's cartographers in the audience who picked up that those were coordinates.
Right.
Kudos to you.
And a quick shout out to all the cartographers listening.
After we get the coordinates from John, because he picked them up in the journal, Sam and Dean find themselves in Blackwater Ridge, Colorado, where a young man named Tommy has gone missing.
Boys join his sister Haley, her brother Ben, and a guide Roy to search for Tommy in the woods. It's soon clear to the Winchesters that they're dealing with a Wendigo.
Oh, man, I've been around one of those with the family in the summer. Plenty of room to camp.
Yeah, that's right. Or it's a predatory monster that feeds on people to survive.
That's Winnebago. Sorry, Winnebago.
That's a different thing, yeah.
The boys can't save Roy from the Wendigo, but some luck and a flare gun, Sam and Dean find Tommy and kill the monster.
Yeah, and along the way they realize that John doesn't want or need to be found, but would rather them keep up the family business of saving people and hunting things.
That's just good parenting right there.
Sure is. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so we're back. We're talking about episode number 2.
Yep.
With Jensen Ackles and Jared
We actually
Padalecki.
call it, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
We call it episode number 1.
Episode number 1, right? Because the pilot
we
is
refer
the
to pilot as kind of
Gotcha.
Pilot, yeah.
And now,
Ooh.
how? First of all, when we were pre-talking about this, I told you it was the episode with the Wendigo.
Yes, it's not an Australian villain.
A Wendigo ate my baby.
Yeah, the Wendigo ate Chuck's baby, which is why we had to kill it first. 'Cause he was-
It's really just a Wendigo with an accent. Is a
Do you remember
Wendigo.
being
Wendigo.
Do you remember being in Australia when we became
Yes.
so Australian? You're like, I want that. I think I
Maybe just for intrigue, we can call it like the Vendingo, and it's half German, half Australian.
Ooh, Wendigo.
Vendingo.
Okay, so how much time had passed between the pilot and this episode?
4 months. So the reason I remember
Like a hiatus.
Like a hiatus. So we shot the pilot, I want to say roughly February 15th, let's say,
Into March.
to March like 4th or 5th. And so we
You find out in May that you got picked up.
we celebrated Jensen's birthday during the pilot on
Okay.
March 1st.
Oh, cool.
And I remember during Wendigo, we celebrated my birthday. So we find out at the upfronts, maybe like April, that we're going to get picked up and that we need to be in May in New York
For the
to
presentation.
be a part of the upfront presentation. I was like, that's awesome. And I remember after that, we went to Nobu with some of the execs from the studio network. It's amazing sushi, and we probably had some sake or some Kirin or something. And then they're like, all right, well, here's to a year in Vancouver. And I was like, what's Vancouver?
No way.
No, I knew that it was a city, but
Right.
that was when I found out that
That we weren't filming in LA.
that we weren't filming in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Wow.
But then we ended up filming in LA, and I celebrated my birthday in July 19th during Wendigo, also known as Wendigo. But it was a brand new cast. You know, he and I had known each other, but everybody else was brand ass new, other than Nutter, who directed that as well.
Well, we also had a whole summer to get to know each other, and they put
Yeah.
us into
Fight training and
Fight
weight
training.
training, yeah.
So we were like hitting a boxing gym every day
Yeah.
for like
Yeah.
months. For like
Yeah.
6 weeks, we were like full on. Fight
And also
training.
just hanging out, like
Getting to know each other and be-
afterwards. Like, all right, you know, we get done like kickboxing, and then be like, all right, well, tonight watching the Spurs, like my house or your house, like let's order
so
some
you were
pizzas and some
you were
beers.
fast friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they put us in the ring and said, let's just do a little sparring.
Seriously?
And he hit me so hard in the nose
Oh my god.
that it was
I got pretty good
it was
clocked.
one of those.
We had headgear on.
We had headgear on, but still, if you get punched straight on, that headgear smashes
Yeah.
your nose. And so it was like one of those things where you start saying yes really fast, but nobody's asked a question where you're like,
Yeah, we both. And he caught me after that just to go like, hey, bitch.
And so,
like,
yeah, so then-
I could take care of myself too. Like,
Yeah.
I know you're tough.
so
but
then I was
I'm
like,
also tough.
I was like, well, I can't be like,
I think you left.
time out.
I think
was
you
like,
left hooked me.
It was a right hook.
Was it a right hook?
Yeah, because you
I knew it
came
came
in
from the side.
you came in with that straight again, and I was like, not again,
Not today.
And so I slipped right and just went wham on the side of his head.
Oh my god.
And then, he said he was like, my ears just went into a bell. And then that's when our trainer was like, all right, that's
all right,
enough, guys.
yeah, y'all get it, y'all
Let's
get
get
it, y'all
out.
get it, yeah.
And we never
I'm
sparred
gonna go.
again.
I'm going to leap in here and say
yeah.
that was a dumb idea at its inception. It's like, hey, you guys are supposed to play partners for the rest of your adult lives. Let's beat the shit out of each other to get
Yeah,
that
yeah.
going and
We're
kind of
also-
warm up that muscle.
Even then, we're also like 6 foot plus, 200 plus pound Texan dudes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
And you're
all
like-
right, you want me to punch somebody? Who?
Yeah,
You know?
Jared especially is like a big puppy who doesn't know how strong he is.
My arm just extends, and I'm like, oh shit, that hit somebody.
So the thing I noticed, Jensen, in this second episode is that your voice sounds more like Dean. In the first episode, it sounds more like Jensen, but Dean had a lower register gruff for voice, and you seem to really find that in this episode.
So that really came after meeting Jeff and then also seeing parts of the pilot and seeing what he was doing as dad. And I was like, okay, if this is a firstborn son who idolizes his father,
want to be like him.
he wants to be like him.
Yeah.
And so he's going to imitate him. And so that's where I was like, well, he has such a rich voice that maybe that's something that Dean inherited from his father. And also he kind of leans into a little bit to kind of be like dad.
Yep, that makes
So that wouldn't have happened in the pilot because I hadn't met Jeff and I hadn't seen what he was going to do with the role yet. So when we got up to Vancouver and we started rolling on the Wendigo, then that's when I was like, oh, that's something that I could, maybe a little flavor I could add to the character.
Right.
Also, after 327 episodes of doing it, I would love to see MRIs of Jensen's vocal cords before Supernatural and after.
Yeah.
Because now, even if you tried to go like, hi there, guys.
Yeah,
you
no,
couldn't do it.
I've
Just
shredded
so
my
many
vocal
shreds
cords over
and-
15
Same
years.
with Misha Collins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, my voice is different as well, but that's
Yeah.
because I hadn't gone through puberty yet.
Right.
Totally, man.
Yeah.
No, you both. I mean, you both were a little more grounded. You know what I mean? And it's very quickly. You know who these guys are. You know what the show is. You're already. It's not like this. I know it was Monster of the Week the first season or two, but still, like right away, you get your relationship, and that's the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think going back to kind of what we talked about in
Well,
the first
that episode, we had that conversation
Yeah.
with Kripke on the park bench.
That's right. We were shooting in Stanley Park. in
We were
Vancouver.
Stanley Park, and they were setting up a big shot. Yeah, I forget, but Krip just walks over. He goes, "Hey guys, let's have a quick chat." So we walked over and we sat on this park bench that was facing out over the Burrard Inlet. It was a taster's choice moment.
Right by the Lionsgate Bridge for
And-
Vancouver.
And he just kind of had a little heart to heart with us and said, "Guys, this show, if it's going to be a success, it boils down to you two and the relationship that you are going to have both off and on screen." It's really about these brothers and how they relate to each other. It's not about the monsters. It's not. He's like, I can write all that stuff, and I can put all the shiny things in this show that I can possibly come up with. But at the end of the day, it's the people are going to care about how these two characters relate to each other.
Yeah.
And so it really set a good tone, I think, for Jared and I, because then I think we got it then that it was like, okay, this is going to be the most important thing that we do, not the hunting of a vampire, not the fight scenes, not the this.
It's not about zombies. It's not,
and
that's, I
was
think,
that comment he made, was that apropos of something? I mean, or is that just like, hey, I want to sit you down and have this conversation? Or had something occurred that made him think, I should tell these guys this?
Yeah, he came up to Vancouver to watch the film, because he had obviously been in LA during the filming of the pilot. And so during Wendigo, he came up to be there. I don't think he was up there every day.
No.
But I think he was like leaving the next day, and he just wanted to check. He had already known us now through, a month of the pilot, and we had obviously gone back and forth during the 4-month hiatus. But he came up, and I think this was, like Ackles said, like the taster's choice moment for him to go like, okay, I think he was leaving the next day or something. And so he was
and
like,
he just
want to
have a powwow.
Yeah, I want to have like a little heart-to-heart touch base with you guys.
With his two quarterbacks.
Yeah. Say,
Right.
I really grateful. I love this. Y'all are awesome with each other, with the crew, with your characters, with your fellow cast, and that's what's going to be necessary. And I think and we kind of touched on this in episode 1 of the podcast, but I think that's also why we outlasted Lost and Heroes and Arrival and the other show that Rob talked about. I can't recall it right now. The irony is that it's called Supernatural, but it was about relationships.
Yeah.
It began about brothers.
Well, and
obviously,
in this episode is when you say family business.
I think he wants us to pick up where he left off. Saving people, hunting things, the family business.
That's it.
Was that the first time you said that?
Yeah.
He says,
I tell you, that
got
really struck me.
what is it? Hunting?
Saving people, hunting things, the family business.
This is what Dad wants us to do, is pick up where he left off.
Yeah.
I think was the line, something like that.
Yep.
And so like Rob, I come into the supernatural world a couple of years later, and we go in, and we've known you guys now for over a decade. Doing conventions, you see tattoos, you see banners, you see posters with that catchphrase on it. I didn't know where that line fell in the
Well, it
history
became
of the show.
part of the show. It was said more than once. I imagine there might be a record somewhere on Supernatural Wiki or something about how many times it actually was said, but it was said dozens of times.
It was it was the mantra,
It became
It was
our
cool
theme song.
seeing it
We didn't
come
have a
out the
theme
first
song.
time,
It
though.
became our theme song that we would refer to here and there.
There's some interesting actors in this show. The actor who played Han Solo in the Han Solo movie.
Alden.
Yeah.
Aaron Reich,
Yeah. And then also the ones we were talking about, you said...
Donnelly Rhodes.
Yeah.
So I'm a big Paul Newman and Robert Redford fan. I'm a big fan of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the opening scene where Robert Redford, Sundance Kid, is playing poker. And when Paul Newman's character, Butch Cassidy, refers to Redford as, hey, Sundance, and then it cuts to who they're playing poker with, the guy who was accusing the Sundance Kid, Robert Redford, of cheating, and then he kind of goes ashen-faced when he hears this guy referred to as Sundance, and he kind of says, I didn't know you were a Sundance Kid. Like, I didn't mean to say that stuff. And then Redford shoots his gun. But anyways, so that...
Did you know that at the time when he was under the show?
I did.
Awesome.
Yeah. I freaked out.
That's
It
cool.
was Donnelly Rhodes, the actor, and rest in peace. He left us a few years ago. But I asked him about that. I was like, man, I've watched that movie more times than I can count. It was one of my dad's favorite movies, and yada, yada. And so he was just kind
He's
of
the
telling
guy
me.
you guys interrogate or you talk to.
He's
in
the guy that
cabin
was
about.
attacked
He
by
was
the
boy who-
Wendigo. He's the guy when we're sitting, and Ackles and I were looking at each other going like, he's great. It's like, oh, that's why he's great. Corey Monteith, again, rest in peace.
Gina Holden.
Right.
Yeah, Gina. Who's
She came
awesome.
back and played with us a few times.
Did she?
Yeah.
The one who plays the main girl? Yeah, she's cute.
Yeah,
and
she's great.
I thought she was really good, too.
Gina was great.
She was great. And I worked with her a couple years later in Vancouver again in a Christmas movie I did with Peter O'Toole and Marsh K. Harden and Ed Asner. And Roy Campbell was our Wendigo who...
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think they just wanted to find somebody taller than I was because and they were, but he's awesome, and we saw him
Manute
years
Bol
later.
wasn't available.
Yeah, exactly.
So they went with,
That's a very reference.
Big
to
Bird
2
had a
years ago.
thing. So
Yeah, but
I think the interesting thing, too, that Nutter does this, I'm going to get back to Nutter, but in this episode, it's very much like Jaws. You don't see the Wendigo until later, much later, at the very, very end, really.
Right.
And so
Right.
what's terrifying about it is you don't know what this
the
thing
build-up.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, the build-up, the marching through the woods and assuming that something is watching.
Hey there, this is Richard Speight Jr., and I hope you're enjoying the episode, but we need to pull over for a few seconds for some messages. Hey, this is Richard Speight. You know what? It's 2024. It's a brand new year, and I bet you made some New Year's resolutions, and I bet one of them was to eat healthier. Well, you can get cranking on that resolution right now, my friend, with Factor. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery takes the stress out of meal planning and sets you up for success in the new year. Skip the grocery stores, the prep work, the cooking fatigue. I'm getting tired just talking about it. Instead, get chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. With over 35 meals to choose from per week, including options like keto, calorie smart, vegan, and veggie, and more, plus over 55 weekly add-ons, you will have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart this resolution off right. Forget frantic lunch prep and rush dinner making. That stinks. Factor's 2-minute meals, yes, I said 2 minutes, are your secret weapon in the new year. You get to fuel up fast with restaurant-quality meals all delivered right to your door. It doesn't get any easier than that. And Factor now offers loads of snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, snacks, and more to keep you going no matter what's on the schedule. So I know what you're asking. Rich, how do I tap into this Factor magic? You head to factormeals.com/SPNTAN50 and use code SPNTAN50 to get 50% off. That's a lot off. That's code SPNTAN50 at factormeals.com/SPNTAN50 for 50% off. Make that resolution happen now and make it happen at a discount. Fantastic food that's healthy and delicious and delivered right to my door. Now that is how you start the new year off right. Thanks for listening. Now, back to the episode.
Now, let's talk about David Nutter for a second. So he directed the pilot. He also directed this episode. And he was a producer at the beginning, too. What was it like working with him? And did he direct a bunch?
No, he just the
those
first two. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think for people who don't know David Nutter, it's important to note that for 2 decades, he was
Pilot guy.
the kingmaker. He was if he directed your pilot.
I think he was
odds are you
12
got
for
picked up.
12 as far
We were
as
11.
directing. 11 for
We were his 11th pilot, and we were also his 11th pilot to go to series.
Wow. So when we're saying that he directed pilots, meaning shows that you didn't know if they would get picked up and go to series, all the ones he directed would get picked up.
He
That's
had the
amazing.
he had the golden touch.
Yeah, and and to do a show and have it get picked up and go to series, the odds are against you.
Somebody
Way
had
against.
told me, and this is obviously 15 years ago when we got picked up, because somebody, and I don't know why this number stuck with me, but they said it's from a script that has been sold to a network, that it's like an 86% failure rate to go to series.
And it's probably an 86% failure rate of scripts that try to get sold to networks that don't get sold to networks in the first
Yeah,
place.
even getting that far.
So
Yeah.
from pitch to script to actually
Script to
becoming a
pilot, from pilot to pickup.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was your
And
memory?
then pick up to lasting. I mean, you think about the
Right.
shows that we'll pick up 7 and then that's it.
Well,
Or
we were
13.
on the bubble every year.
yeah, we were on the
every
bubble for a
year,
long,
especially
long
after year one, because we were the last year that the WB network existed.
Right.
Yeah,
Next-
we
the
swapped
next year-
during season one.
Yeah, the next
end
year's-
of season one was CW.
Season 2 was on the CW, and that was in came a whole new regime. So we had a president of our network that wasn't
It wasn't his show.
creative. So
yeah.
it was Dawn Ostroff came in and was she inherited us.
Yeah,
So-
she had been running UPN,
right. She got the gig, and so
Yeah.
it was
and it wasn't her show.
yeah.
because we were on WB and she was running UPN.
Right.
and so she didn't have that same commitment.
Right.
It was
to-
Jen Lari's show.
Yeah.
Who was the WB president at the
Yeah.
time, and he didn't. Don got the gig, and David didn't. But
And then the next year they did a show called Reaper about a ghost hunter named Sam.
it
Just
was
to
a
let you-
slight
yeah.
comedy version.
Just to let you know what she probably thought of Supernatural.
God.
Literally, a ghost hunter named Sam.
Oh, my
Filming
God.
in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
I think she was hoping for her own shows.
Wow. So, and what's your memory of working with Nutter?
I've worked with 2 very well-known directors, Nutter being one of them, the other one being James Cameron. And both of them have a similarity in that they never sit down, and they're always very close to set, and they have an endless supply of energy,
Yeah.
but you never see them eat or drink anything. And I don't understand it. I just don't, I constantly would watch him like, what is he on? Like, what is this kind of found tank of adrenaline that these guys live on? David was very much like that, but he was always up, always on his feet, always right there in the scene, right off camera, has his own little personal monitor stand. But he was also very, for lack of better terms, gentle with the actors.
I was going to say something to that effect. Like, I've worked with directors who have done 3 or 4 episodes.
He's not Kim Manners.
No. He's gentle, but also, from what I recall, and again, here we sit, it's 2021, and we're talking about 2005.
Yeah.
But I seem to recall, and maybe it's also the nature of he did the pilot and the first episode after that, but it seemed like what I imagine he must realize when shooting a pilot is cast it correctly, cast it by people whose instincts goes towards what their character will be, and then don't over-direct them. Because we're all figuring shit out. Like, I don't feel like I really knew Sam Winchester until at least towards the end of season 1. So, and a lot of actors, especially Jensen and I both had a body of work, but we were still learning. Like, we were still like, I don't want episode 1 or the pilot of Supernatural to be the best Sam Winchester ever is. Like, he's going to have to evolve, much like humans evolve. And so he seemed to get that. I think most of his directing was actually done in casting.
Yeah.
And then he was setting up, he's a wonderful visualist. I don't know the word for it.
Sure.
You know, like, his vision of what's going on is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so he gets that and he goes, okay, I'm going to trust these actors to do what we hired them to do. And if there's something that's amiss, then I'll correct. But I'm not going to go in and micromanage and go like, hey, we do it a little bit more angry, because maybe Sam isn't as angry as we think. And maybe Sam ends up being the more sympathetic. He set the scenes and set the stage for us to do what we do as best as we can. Because if you give an actor too many notes, they freeze. There's a point of diminishing returns. And so it felt like it was supportive. He's gentle as a person, and he just wants you to do your best work. And he does his best work when you do your best work. So if you walk in and tell me to be comedic as Sam Winchester, I'm going to suck. Because Sam Winchester is not a funny guy. And I'm going to be sitting there going like, I got to make this funny. I got to make this funny. Like, there are moments that Sam has made jokes and this and that, but he was a pretty serious character. Vice versa, if you tell Jensen to go like, hey, can you make Dean a little bit more scared of everything? Because it's a scary show. And if Dean isn't scared, then the audience won't be scared. It's be like, well, that's not Dean. Like, Dean goes in and goes like, all right, if this is my last day, this is my last day, but you don't scare me, so that when Dean is scared in season 12 or whatever, that it means even more. And so David Nutter is very long game. He's playing chess. He's not playing checkers.
Right, which works when you're directing the first couple episodes to set up a
That's
show.
the only way it works, I think. Because if you go in and you try and force people to act against their instinct, then why'd you hire them in the first place?
Right.
Because then they're going to try and marry that and match that for however long the show goes, which probably won't be long because they're having to focus on doing something that's unnatural.
Yeah.
I have a question for you guys. Because you show up to episode 1, and you guys are friends, and I would imagine at that point you also start building bonds with your crew, many of whom were with you the whole ride, aside from the pilot. Like Serge, he was there episode 1, right? You're with Serge for 15 years. You're with countless of that. And how is that experience kind of going from the 2 guys who did the pilot and now the sort of forging of what became the Supernatural crew family?
For me, honest to God, the majority of the first, let's say, July to December of 2005, which would have been episodes 1 to the Benders, because the Benders bookended our hiatus. So I don't know, maybe episode 12 that was. I was focused on Jensen, and Sam was focused on Dean. And I didn't really know yet. I had been a guest star. I'd kind of been a journeyman to some degree. I'd done a few movies and a few pilots, been number 13 on the call sheet of Gilmore Girls for 60-something episodes, but there'd be new directors and people would be like, hey, you worked with blah, blah, blah on Gilmore Girls. I'm like, I don't remember. I was just a dumb kid. Like, I was so nervous about knowing my lines, hitting my marks, showing up on time, hanging my wardrobe, that once Jared hit his stride as Sam, that's when I realized that I could also spend time getting to know the crew. At first, I was just focused on like, I don't want to jack this up, Yeah, the retention on Supernatural was outstanding.
Really impressive.
And so for me, once I realized who Sam was, and it was like, oh, okay, I can do this. Because a lot of my first several episodes were like, okay, who is Sam? I'm learning new shit about him every episode. I have to download that and save to the hard drive, not just keep a tab open, so to speak. Then I think when I looked out at the crew, I realized that they had just seen Jensen and me working together in concert in a friendly but creative and effective way. By then, they had a sense of us. They're like, oh, nice to get to know you better. I've seen you work 18-hour days for the last 5 months. I know you're a good dude. I know Ackles is a good dude. I know that y'all are here project first, not like Jared first or Jensen first. And so I feel like there was that mutual trust. It was like, okay, cool. Because especially back in the mid-2000s, a lot of 20-something-year-old actors and actresses weren't known as being very group mentality, family first, best idea wins kind of thing. And I think Jensen and I were from the get. And I think they saw that and they were like, oh, thank God. Like, these guys seem pretty normal.
And so at this point, you had a lot of people who worked on the show that worked on it on the very last day.
I want to hear Ackles real quick talk about what you thought about getting to know the crew.
Yeah, it was most shows, movies, projects like this, you've got a cast that a lot of times the cast will get to know each other. They'll go out to cast dinners, they'll do that. It was just Jared and I. So I felt like we got to know our crew very quickly because that was the extension of who we were surrounding ourselves with in Vancouver. We were away from home, we were away from our family, away from our friends. And so Jared and I, very quickly formed a brotherly bond, both on and off screen. And then very quickly, I think, became bonded to our camera operators and assistants and our directors and the writers that would, so we very quickly grew this bond that was really unbreakable for the better part of 2 decades. We also had a very young crew.
Yeah.
We were young going into this. I mean, we were in our mid-20s when we started this thing, and there were a lot of crew that were
Also
young.
20s, yeah.
That were, I mean,
also
think about
without spouses and kids yet.
Yeah, didn't have, and so I mean, you think about like Tichy and Dean Weber and Robin and like
Gabe.
There was a lot of crew that were close in age to us, and so we just immediately had this cool bond with both the cast and the crew that never really broke.
Yeah, and it was funny in the later years of Supernatural. I guess it would have been season 11 or 12. We started having what we would refer to as the 3-decade crew members, which meant that they started the show when they were 29, and so they were now 40, and so they would have done the show in
20s,
their
30s, and 40s.
and their 40s.
Yeah,
and then we had
amazing.
people who started, they were 38, and they turned 50, and so it'd be like they were 30s, 40s, and 50s.
But the cool thing that afforded us too, all being kind of like having a young crew and a young cast.
3-decade.
I'm a 3-decader, yeah.
Jeez.
I am.
Having a young cast and crew it was very obvious when a parent was in town. So like, when good old Robert Singer would show up on set, it was very clear that dad was home.
Yeah.
And a dad that we all loved and couldn't get enough of, but he was very clearly
Like stern uncle.
The patriarch of
Even still. So
He's like, is this what y'all do when I'm not around? I'm going to have to talk to y'all.
So episode 1 and 2, like he's there.
He was there. His first episode he directed was Phantom Traveler, which I think was filmed as episode 4 or 5.
4 or 5, yeah.
Dead in the Water was 4, so it was 5.
Okay.
So we filmed the pilot, then Wendigo, then we filmed Hookman, which
that got
aired until
moved later
7.
because it needed some additional work.
I forget what 3 was.
Dead in the Water. No, pilot, Wendigo, Hookman, Dead in the Water, Phantom Traveler.
Okay, so episode 4 or 5.
So that's when we met Bob
yeah.
because he was in LA essentially babysitting Eric because Eric was 33?
I think it was 30.
30, 31 when the show got picked up, which is awfully young for
He looked a lot older,
showrunner.
but he
So Bob.
Bob was kind of hired to be like the old veteran,
father lion,
who came in and was like, "I'm going to make sure that Eric keeps it in between, keeps it in the lines."
Because Bob's been around the block. Well, so there are a couple of trivia things about this episode I didn't know. But so Jess, whose birthday we see on her tombstone in this episode, and Dean have the same birthday.
I didn't know that.
January 24th, which is also the birthday of Eric Kripke's wife, whose name is Deanna.
Deanna.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know the Deanna part. That's great.
Yeah. And this is the first of many episodes that would include cast members from Battlestar Galactica, which also filmed in Vancouver. Those cast members were Donnelly Rhodes and Callum Keith Rennie.
Yeah.
I remember, Callum.
Yeah.
Good Roy.
And Rhodes passed away at the age of 80 in 2018. And then you said Corey Monteith. It was the 4th screen credit for Corey. And we already said Alden. So, well, this has been awesome. It's so fun to hear these stories from you guys. Real quick, too, we want to give you a chance to sort of talk about what you're doing right now. Obviously, you're on Walker.
Yeah. Currently filming episode 9
Okay.
of this season, which will be 20 episodes.
Okay.
We did
Wow.
18 last
Awesome.
year.
And then just got announced that you're in the works to
Do a prequel.
Prequel.
Yeah. So hoping to bring some more work down to Texas. But I've been learning on the job about the producing side and how long things take to we've been developing this since basically January.
Wow.
Before we even aired Walker, the OG Walker, our OG Walker, because I guess OG Walker would be Chuck.
Yeah.
Second generation OG Walker. But yeah, so we're working on that and hoping to film in the new year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then Jensen, you're going to be on the new season of The Boys.
Yeah, Eric somehow wrangled me into doing another project with him.
That's exciting.
No, it was a super
That
super
doesn't have
great-
standards and practices that WB and CW have.
You're right. Exactly.
Yeah, everything he thought would be funny to do to me while I was on Supernatural that he couldn't because of standards and practices, he got out of his system on season 3 of The Boys. So
God. I'm
I've
so scared.
I've told my family to not watch it, but everybody else should watch it.
Yeah.
Everybody else should watch
Absolutely.
it, but just not my mother. And
And then your company is working on a prequel for Supernatural.
we've got a period, early 70s, the story of how mom met dad, basically.
That's
awesome. And kind of it's fun. It's been a deep dive back into the show because we have a lot of waypoints that were established by what we lovingly call the mothership. And we want to make sure we hit those waypoints, but the in-between is what we're really having a lot of fun with, is filling in the blanks, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. The network has script in hand, and we should know a lot more come January.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mothership's good. Mothership sounds better than OG.
I like OG. Jensen, Jared, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, guys.
Bobby.
Always fun to talk a little R&R.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the episode, but we need to pull over for a second for some messages, and also I have to tinkle. Thank you for supporting Supernatural then and now. And now, back to the show. So great.
I tell you, that was obviously fun, but also educational. I like, for example, now you get a better window into why David Nutter was so successful directing pilot after pilot after.
Yeah, and the thing Jared talked about his energy and having so much energy. I've never met David Nutter. You got to work with David Nutter. I've never met him. So
I have met David Nutter. I've worked with David Nutter.
He didn't direct Threshold, so I wouldn't know him.
It's true. Anyway, but Nutter is a legend, and you really get to hear why when he's helped shaping. He shot the pilot, directed the pilot. Now he's directing the first episode, and look, he set the tone for the rest of the series.
Actually, we were speaking to Bob Singer, and he had this great story about Wendigo.
Let me just back up for a second about Wendigo. Eric had written the episode subsequent to the pilot, and he had written a really good ghost story. Very late in the game, a guy by the name of David John Larry, who was the head of the WB, which is where we were on before it became the CW.
Yeah.
Well, the pilot's a ghost story. Do we have to do another ghost story? And I said, well, gee, there are some shows that only do ghost stories. When it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He was adamant that we couldn't do another ghost story right after the pilot, and so Eric came up with this Wendigo in a white heat, and it was so. You go, oh my God! Well, this is not a good way to get this ball rolling, And Nutter went up and directed it, and with Nutter, who's brilliant, but you're not going to get your normal 8-day shoot and get the hell out episode,
Right.
The studio was a little nervous. It was not a fun time.
So how many days did that episode take to shoot?
I think we ended up with 9, maybe 10 days, with a second unit day, but it was expensive. And,
Yeah.
Right.
And frankly, not Eric's best script. So,
So where did the ghost story get punted? Where did that end up being?
I can't even remember that, Rich, but we probably did some version of it down the line.
Yeah.
But I can remember when the studio first saw Wendigo and they saw how much it cost, and Peter Roth, who was president of Warner Brothers, who was incredibly supportive of us, but he went, oh boy, he was not happy.
Really? Was the Wendigo costume? Were you happy the way that came out? Do you remember that?
Sorry?
The Wendigo, when you actually see the Wendigo at the end of the episode?
No. To me, that was like Jaws. It was great until the shark flopped onto the boat. And then...
Sweet. Okay, we're going to hear more from Bob. Great stuff in our next episode. Let's check in on the bitch count.
Ooh, Da-ba-da-ba-ba.
That's right. That's right. This is a section where we're racking how many times they say the word bitch or son of a bitch. I don't know. Maybe we need to rename this bit. But anyway, the episode, we get our first sons of bitches. One from Sam and one from Dean.
Yep, one each.
As well as an extra bitch from Dean, taking us to a series-long count of 5 at this point.
I hope somebody other than us is keeping a tally here because this number going to get big.
It's going to get big. And in our Antiques road trip, checking in on things that date the show, well, I mean, we've got maps, satellite phones.
Okay, they're saying there's 2 schools of thought here because I get made fun of a lot for using a map. I think maps are current. I think you need to know how to use a map. When the EMP takes all our phones out, half the youngsters are going to be lost. Not this guy. My folded map's going to get me right to my destination. So if you don't know how to use a map, joke's on you.
Aw, Dad.
Shut up, son.
So let's check in on the mythology of this episode. Our trusty writing staff has handed me these factoids.
Ooh, you can smell the mimeograph. These are fresh.
So the Wendigo mythology that Sam relays is generally accurate. The monster is found in the folklore of many First Nations and indigenous tribes.
Not just the Cree?
That's right. Versions of the legends are found among many others.
Like?
The Algonquin,
Nope.
the Naskapi,
No, Algonquian.
the Naskapi, the Innu.
And others.
That's right. I think we did okay.
Sometimes called Wendigo, Weetigo, and Wetigo. The legend is pretty much the same as we get into this episode, which is...
You're just making up words.
I know. Which is a person who ate human flesh, became a monster. So if you eat human flesh, you become a monster. That's a sobering warning to the kids at home.
Yeah, and also not someone you want to bring as your +1.
Nope.
You know what I mean? The look of the Wendigo, tall, emaciated, and very scary, is part of the lore as well. It's worth noting that this is one of many folk tales and urban legends that were immortalized in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark anthology. And we'll see several more of these popular campfire tales in the first half of the season.
Now, Dean protects the camp with symbols he says comes from Anansi.
Anasazi?
I don't know. My Aunt Nancy.
No, it's not your Aunt Nancy.
I don't know.
Please leave her out of this. No, Anasazi, who were a group of ancient Native Americans in the Four Corners region of the U.S. and part of the ancient Pueblo culture.
I guess, what, Dean figures these symbols from one indigenous American culture will protect them from monsters from any different indigenous culture?
I mean, if that's what you want to go with, sure.
Oh, whatever, Dean.
Anyway, these are never used again. Such a great episode with so many guest stars that pop up on other shows and became, popular for other things.
It's a who's who. I mean, literally, it's like the American Graffiti of Supernatural episodes.
It got me excited. I mean, between the first episode and this episode, I'm like, this show's not kidding around.
Man, it kind of makes you wish you'd been on the show. It might have launched you into stardom.
I know, right? If only. We got Jared Padalecki starring as Sam Winchester, Jensen Ackles as Dean Winchester.
Hallam Keith Rennie as Roy, Gina Holden as Haley, Alden Einreich as Ben.
Donnelly Rhodes as Mr. Shaw, Graham Wardle as Tommy. The episode also featured Timothy Weber, Corey Monteith, Ren Roberts, and Roy Campsall.
The teleplay for Wendigo was written by show creator Eric Kripke, with a story by Ron Milbauer and Terry Hughes Burton.
It was directed by David Nutter and edited by Paul Karasik.
With music by Jay Gruska and Christopher Leonards, and featured songs by Foreigner, Leonard Skinner, and Rush.
Or if you're watching on Netflix, Steve Pfister and Eliza.
That's the one I saw.
Me too.
It was executive produced by Eric Kripke and Robert Singer.
Wendigo first aired on September 20th, the day before my birthday, 2005, when I was 14.
40.
Well, this was a good one, Rich. It was super fun. Doing the conventions all this time and hearing lore from the show, you hear a lot about Wendigo. It's one of the most popular sort of monsters from the first season.
I know, and I would say that not just a monster, but there are quotes in this episode that you're like, oh my gosh, I've been seeing that on tattoos and T-shirts
totally.
for a decade. I had no idea which episode it was from.
Totally.
It's from this one.
Yeah.
Saving people, hunting things.
That's right.
The family business.
That's right.
I mean, Jensen has a freaking brewery named The Family Business. So here we are.
The character that I play, Chuck Shirley, writes the books that you will find out in season 4. But one of the books that I write, they had a poster in every set that was my home, was Wendigo. There was a picture of the Wendigo monster sort of going through some bushes.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Well, it was fun to do it with the OG fellas.
Sure was. Glad we had it recorded.
Me too.
Now, if you want to know, I'll tell you. This episode of Supernatural Then and Now is hosted and executive produced by Richard Speight Jr. and Rob Benedict.
Produced by Stephen Hine. Written by Jessica Mason, author of The Binge Watcher's Guide to Supernatural, an unofficial companion.
And edited and associate produced by Trey Boudet.
Music provided by Tim Wynn.
The episode was recorded with the help of Sonic Fuel Studios.
This podcast is from Story Mill Media.
For the latest news on this and other podcasts, follow Story Mill Media on Instagram and or Twitter. Exciting.
Richie?
Bobby?
I'm also rewatching Threshold.
Yeah, it's a quick rewatch, 13 episodes, but I think it's worth it. I think you'll find
6 degrees of the dink.
6 degrees of the dink.
Story Mill Media.